So we're going into the discussions on energy, and I'd like to give the floor first to Jacqueline to say a couple of words about this.
It's just a few words. I met Wangari Maathai and followed Wangari Maathai in the forest a few years ago. And I would like to dedicate this day, this particular morning, to Wangari Maathai. So I think you can stand up because she was a great woman. Thank you very much, and thank you to be there.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. We can certainly keep her in mind as we're having our discussions. So we're going to start with a set of interviews, and let me introduce you to our moderator. We have with us Sophie Lambin. She is the co-founder and managing director of Kite Global Advisors. Prior to this, she was the director of the Thought Leadership Series at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I give you the floor, Sophie, for our energy discussions.
Thank you. Much, Gillian, and thank you for the wonderful work you're doing, by the way, enabling those transition and keeping everybody entertained when people haven't not yet turned up. So it's a great honor to lead that first discussion. Your Excellency, distinguished ministers, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on climate and energy. More than 1.2 billion people around the world have not access to energy. 17% of the global population, it's in fact 95% of those are in sub-Saharan Africa and developing Asia. 2016 is turning out to be the hottest year. Last month, we are already 1.45 degrees above the 20th century average, not far from the 1.5 degree target. So the situation is urgent. We have a major challenge in front of us. And to join me to explore that challenge, I'm delighted to invite Laurence Tubiana to join me on stage. Laurence is the French ambassador for international climate negotiation and was a special representative for COP21. I think we can say that Florence is really the architect of COP21. Please join me in welcoming Laurence Tubiana. Laurence, I'm putting my stopwatch on. Here we go. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Laurence, I first wanted to start by thanking you for what you have achieved collectively with your colleagues. We would be in a very difficult mindset and position today if it wasn't for what was achieved by COP. I think we'll be a bit more depressed in humankind ability to save itself. So obviously a lot has been achieved, a lot is left to be done. Can you give us a little bit your perspective of where we're at and what's coming next?
As you said, we will have been very depressed if Paris didn't happen. I remember the first months after Copenhagen, and we were so depressed of what happened there because it was like an incredible mobilization that finally could not really produce something really strong, even if some progress have been done. But now we have, after this historic moment, when more than 170, 80 countries, 189 countries propose contribution, national contribution. There was an enormous movement of really rallying around a very, very ambitious agreement, and we certainly will develop that later in the conversation. Where we are now is that we have a framework. This framework has many virtues and a lot of fragility at the same time. So everything has to be done, and nothing is done in real. Even if what I was looking when I built the strategy for the French government 3 years ago now, the idea was we don't need only a paper, an agreement, a treaty. We need a conviction, an expectation, a belief that this economy global economy has to change. She has to be the global economy has to be on a different track, which is a track of a low-carbon economy, resilient and inclusive. And that was the message I was looking to produce by Paris. And so not only, again, a intergovernment agreement, but at the same time, the engagement, the commitment of the local authorities, the businesses, the civil society, a big movement around the same objectives. Going from the financial institutions to, again, the governments, to the companies, to the mayors. Because if it doesn't, this movement doesn't exist, you can't implement a treaty, an agreement, how excellent it is, if you don't have this willingness to do it. And you know what international law is about. It's about the willingness of everyone to abide by its rule. You will not invade any country because a country would not fulfill its commitment to Paris. It's because of the commitment of every nation to really do the job. And so the value is there. Now the debate is back to countries, to any countries, to see how it can really engage its economy, its society in a different direction, to look for, of course, for cooperation and solidarity, as Nicolas Hulot said very well yesterday, that we have to do that together, because no one, even the biggest economy, like China, for example, US, could not do that on its own. We have to do it collectively. And the third element is, of course, the fragility is it depends on the willingness of everyone. But again, when you look at the different trends in the trade, in the finance, in many elements of what global economy is about, you see that once a sufficient group of actors are convinced that it's the right direction, in a way, everyone wants to bandwagon against, because it shows that it's possible, that some optimism can be bring that, yes, we can do that. We can, in a way, change things. There is no fatality of degrading the environment or emitting more and more. Growth is not necessarily linked to a growth in emissions. And the decoupling, for example, between these emissions, the GIG emission and the economy is not a fatality. And so we're at that moment, precise moment where we are, I think the most important element is that in each society, in each nation, this discussion is now put in place, that everyone say how we will implement what we commit to, how beneficial it will be, what are, of course, the difficulties and the obstacles, what kind of help do we need from outside, and how we can accelerate the movement. Because as you know, what we decide in Paris is very ambitious as a goal, because we want, as you said, to limit the temperature well below 2 degrees C, so to stabilize this over the century, meaning that even what the countries has proposed in their initial contribution is not enough. So this acceleration is certainly the second element. So to start the discussion implementation at home, and second, to see how we can do better, again, all together.
So are you satisfied with the level of momentum? Because you've done the job in Paris, you now have Marrakesh coming in November. Are you satisfied with the pace of advancement that the countries have done back at base? And if not, what can you do? What needs to happen to accelerate?
Of course, it's a delicate moment because, in a way, there was a lot of hope and a lot of anxiety. Even 2 weeks before Paris, many friends were calling me and saying, maybe we go to second Copenhagen, we are not sure we can get that. And after that, and because of the dynamic and in a way a little miracle that happened there, many countries finally were surprised of the quality, the strength, and the ambition of what we accepted all together in Paris. And so there was like a moment immediately after these 3 or 4 months after, where people were saying, how we do that? We mobilize so much energy to do that, to produce that. So there was a little down, huh? And so I remember the first Davos in February. It was in February, you'll probably be there. And people were saying, what do we do? What have we to, how we can mobilize ourselves again, and what will be the plan? So I know this is recomposing, and now many more sort of actors are mobilizing around that to prepare Marrakesh. I can say because Marrakesh will be a point in a pathway. It's a milestone in a pathway. It's not the end of things, of course. We have, of course, the problem of this agreement entering into force as soon as possible, maybe as early as the beginning of next year.
The what, sorry?
Meaning that everyone will ratify this agreement. For the moment, 175 countries have signed up, and then they have to go, many countries have to go through their parliament to be able to implement the agreement. And so, well, it's rather technical, but many countries are doing that job at home, and we hope that by next year this will be in place, meaning that they will, of course, this agreement will exist legally, which is still not the case. It has been politically approved, but it has now to still exist legally. But beyond that, so that's a very important of preparation for Marrakesh to just accelerate that movement. The second element is really to get in Marrakesh a number of big issues, in particular on the cooperation aspect. Marrakesh has to decide and organize a mechanism of cooperation around capacity building. Many countries has to develop their contributions and their plans, their climate plans, to be more resilient and really to decrease or really very sort of lower their pathway, in particular on the emissions, on the greenhouse emissions. And they need support. They need technical support, financial support, and Marrakesh has to produce this element. And I think in 2018, we will all gather in a very important moment, which is to measure how far we are from the pathway which reasonably could conduct us to limit this, to fulfill this goal of Paris. And it will be the first test of how the international community gather and reassess, supported by a scientific community, where we are, where we can go, and what kind of efforts. Paris is about a dynamic. It's not sort of set in stone. We have to revise and improve over time, because that's the way I think we can get there. We can't have a low carbon economy in a fortnight. It's a very, very long process.
I mean, I can see it's a different kind of conversation now. The target is set, the mechanism are in place. It's going to start seeing how we're doing against those. So I can see how the conversation will change towards implementation. Looking at the macro level, there are some trends out there that seem to be going against the grain of what happened in Paris. When you look at the discussion in the US, do we need a plan B if Trump comes into power? He says he goes into California, he says he's going to open the tap for water, not even acknowledging the drought, which is comical. And then he's saying to the coal miner, I'm going to give you your job. But at the same time, he says he believes in markets. So he's clearly full of contradiction, but we are clearly a little bit worried about the trend there. Also, Brexit, what does it mean for European collaboration? What does it mean for European collaboration? I mean, what are your views about those trends, and how worried are you about the implication for Paris?
Probably I am full of optimism, because I'm not that worried. Why? Is because, one, I just tweet that I don't think climate change will be very much affected by Donald Trump declaration. That will change things, no? So the floods will continue, the drought in California will continue, and in a way, let's be calm. I visit many countries before coming here, and I've been in India recently, to China recently, and even to US. And the mood there is, anyway, that's the right track, even in India, where, there was a huge conversation on what is the real interest of India. Is India really has to use all this coal, or India has to really, for the sake of local pollution and for the sake of really technological innovation and growth point in a different direction. And I see that, again, the national implementation plans in China, in India, in many other countries will not be derailed by any US doubts. And that's very important. This agreement, our colleague from the Turkish parliament was saying the P5 is not all the world. No, the P5 is not all the world. And there is many countries who have taken decisions. That's the value of Paris. And their decision is to go in a different direction because they feel it's good for their own economy and their own society. So I was surprised by the cold reception of Donald Trump reaction. People were not, even in Bonn, people were not sort of fearful of them. They were saying maybe US would have a different stance in some years, but that will not change the course of things. Talking about, so that's interesting, because you could say, oh, it's about this agreement is about China and US, that's it. It's not, that's it. It's much broader. On the Brexit side, well, one is what will happen again in UK after. That's a political dimension of it. In one side, of course, there were opponents of this very ambitious climate policies that UK has developed over years. And UK is one of the countries who has the toughest carbon budget, really legislation in place that really point to a 95 reduction of emissions by 2050. And with very precise steps. So that's one. Whatever happened in Brexit, what will be the UK policy is even more important than whatever. And on the EU side, of course, you have this tension, you have these difficulties with some countries who are really want to delay a little bit the action. So again, you can't understand EU without this broader context. And the broader context is EU is not the leadership alone. He has many, and I would of course be happy to take here of how the islands and the small island in particular, and the small island developing states in particular, have played a role of pushing everyone in action. And so, yes, then we have difficulties. Yes, Brexit will be a bad news for, in a way, because it will open endless discussion on other topics that are less important than climate and environment. But at the same time, you have this sort of global movement, again, because it's not only governments only, it's many in societies. So yes, it will delay, but I don't think it will change course.
Great, so the convention is firmly grounded. You don't see risk of contagion, and which is a great message. So you alluded to the role of the small island developing states. I would love to go and talk a little bit about the significance of Paris in the Mauritius, or broadly speaking, for the African nation. You've alluded to the role they played in Paris. I'm also interested to hear about your perspective on the role they can play moving forward.
First, maybe we have to remember that the island states, and of course in their in your organization on how this as a group has played a major role in really keeping climate high on the political agenda. And in a way, it's striking. On one side, you described there was this sort of political element you were describing, but we can look at economic element, economic crisis globally, and the recession around 2007, 2008. So many elements would have put climate outside of the picture. And no, it has not been the case. And the fact that so many 150 head of state came to Paris was a sign that, again, and it's complex to understand sometimes, even if there are many other issues, terrorism, war, economic recession in many countries, still unemployment, still it is a very important political issue. And that's why, because a number of actors, and the small island in particular, has obliged the international community to look at this and say we can't we can't ignore that. We have to face the problem we have been creating, and we have to solve it. And before Paris, believe me, if I had not that group to support our action, to bring all people together, we may have had an agreement, yes, but this agreement could have much, much less strong, much less powerful without the action of the island in general, and houses and small islands in development states in particular. And it was evident at the last days of the COP when this group created the High Ambition Coalition, High-Level Ambition Coalition, rallying around the islands, LDCs, less developing countries in general, but as well, of course, EU and United States and Brazil and some emerging countries that normally are not in the more positive camp. And this group imposed that we had to aim high. And it was a beautiful image. They gathered all together and they went. It was the last day. We were, of course, fearful of how all the government would react to the proposal that France was making as the final text. And the ministers and the heads of delegation of this coalition with EU, all the small islands, they came all together in the room all together. And it was a beautiful image that this coalition was physically there to say, we have to aim high. And it was no more on really posing as victims of whatever climate change is imposing them. And of course, these territories are victims of climate change. But they were actors. They were saying, we will push the direction, we will make the change. You will convince you that you have to do that. And it's a beautiful signal that among the 15 countries that have ratified, meaning putting the agreement in their domestic law, most of them are small islands. So I have to recognize that. I'm sure that this capacity, not because of power, not because of demography, not because of economic weight, these small territories are pushing the world in a different direction because of their moral value, but that capacity to, in a way, to articulate with others, to do good geopolitics, not the geopolitics we know normally with exactly power and force and the economic pressure, but with ethics, moral, and vision of what the environment and the international economy should look like.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. So, and I think your point about saying those small islands are not just victims, they have a part to play in not only pushing the agenda, making it real, but also in driving their own growth and decoupling that economic growth from global gas emission. What is your view on how they should accelerate access to energy for all the people and at the same time, reduce their carbon footprint?
You mean in the context of the small island or
yes.
in general? I think it was very interesting to see two elements. Maybe 3 years ago, when we began to really focus on the Paris outcome, most of the small islands were pointing to, of course, loss and damages, and they are very high. Probably when you do the measurement of what the investment expenditure are compared to, for example, EU and the small island state, 20% of the expenditure or investment is because of loss and damages linked to extreme events. So the economic cost is very high. And again, World Bank has published very recently a study where you see that a country like Jamaica should have a growth rate of 4% a year since the last 15 to 20 years, and the growth rate had been heavily reduced because of these destructions. So the concern was there on loss and damages, and then growingly the idea was we have to develop and to show that we can do better and that we can have an economy that could be resilient and low carbon, to show the others that it can be done. And then come the idea of islands can be 100% energy autonomous because of renewable energy. And you have now many islands. La Réunion is one example, but there are many others that have put forward plans to be 100% renewable energy based by 2030 or by 2050. And this is a sign that, yeah, we think that is a good thing for us. And many type of sort of vision. Another example, in the agreement, I push myself personally very strongly that because we know that the countries for the moment are not that optimistic they can really decarbonize, what we call decarbonize the economy, get really away from fossil fuel-based economy. And so we have an article in the agreement who says every country has to show his long-term vision, his 2050 plans. And that's something that's really, for me, is very important. And then to backcast from this sort of point of arrival, so a very low carbon emission by country, each country. So how would you do that? And how would you need as much innovation, etc.? And the more active preparing that are many small islands. They want to have their plans, not because it's important for the global emission target, but because they want to show that we can do differently, that we can have a different understanding on the relation between economy and the environment, a different vision of the future, a different vision of innovation and progress. And I think that's a very strong, powerful statement they are making. So again, you don't have this political weight, but you can have this leading by example.
Right. Great. You referred to a small miracle happening in Paris, and I can't help but notice that a lot of women were involved in that whole process. Yourself, Rachel Kite, Christiana Figueres, Ségolène Royal. It's a leading question. But just can you tell us a little bit more? What do you think happened? What did it take? What, Nicolas Hulot talked about solidarity. We all like the idea. In principle, in practice, it's difficult when interests collide. What happened? How would you characterize that miracle?
With Christiana Figueres, we have a sort of a joke. We say the Biodiversity Convention, we have a convention parallel to the Climate Convention as a treaty, international treaty, that is about ecosystems. And that the Climate Convention is about ecosystems. And it has been proven over time. I remember in Copenhagen, many head of states, and including the French one at that moment, saying, I will save the planet, I'm the one. I'm the one who put the text, the good one. It was a competition of guys saying, we will be the one. And it was funny on one side because most of them, of course it was not the case of Angela Merkel, who knew very well what was the meaning of having a strong climate agreement already because she had been Minister of Environment in her country. And these guys were preaching that this was very important and they will save the planet. Well, the result was a competition between egos, and there are very nice films about that. And the Danish and the French and the UK, whatever. And this, we have, maybe because we are women and maybe the ego element, it exists, of course, we should not be naive of that. But the notion that you can't force people, it's not about domination, it's about pulling together slowly everybody in the same line and being trustful. I would say that...
Trustful.
Yeah, you have to be people have to trust you. When you are 190 and more countries, you can't really negotiate to each other. It's too big. No, we know that. So we have, in a way, to delegate to others. And it was very strong that the last week in Paris, we presented 3 drafts successively, and each time it was tougher. And each time the people applaud to that, because they trust us. And they trust in particular that these women around, and there was Rachel, and there was Mary Robinson, and I must tell that I use a lot my women's colleagues in all the delegations. And my Venezuelan colleague, who was so supportive, even coming from a very difficult group, and many others that help absolutely tremendously. The Brazilian minister, Isabella Teixeira, the South African minister, Mrs. Muleva, and the extraordinary ambassador of South Africa, they help all together. We help each other to say it's better to have cooperation than conflict, and we have to trust each other. So maybe this women dimension is important. It was a very nice sort of, in Vogue, the magazine, they took a number of photos like L'Oréal did for the science, and that's how Amina began to have her photo on all the airports at the world level. But they made photos of the climate activists and the number, and on women as a climate activist, and it's very strong. You feel that. And ever, I think Christiana, when she would step down from her job, and with myself and others, will try to develop this network of women for climate. And I would love that Jacqueline did that here with the Women Forum. We need a network of women, competent leaders, experts, that do say we need to change course. We have to look at the long term. We have to pressure on all the power system in which we are involved, and that's what Women Forum is about. And we should have climate as the first agenda because it's about resilience, it's about a new innovation, it's about a new economy. And we should be the promoters of that. That's why I think the women factor is very important for this relatively sort of less sensitive ego dimension. We know better to manage that. But on the other side, I think we can have a vision of how we can help each other. One of a young colleague from Morocco told me it's sometimes difficult, in our country, and I know in Morocco, preparing that with a wonderful woman who is Hakim El Haite, very powerful, as many. She, of course, faced difficulties in own society. So we have to help each other. That's very important. The way, even in my country, where we have now this parity law and equivalence between women and men, it's so important to have a network helping you. And that's what international network is so important. Whenever any political situation change, economic situation change, you need support at one point in time. And you have somebody to call to. You have to have that. And the network are for this reason. Even in very difficult political situation, let's have a network you can rely on that can help you internally. And my final word on that is very important. Women can be an agent of change. They are, normally. But many times you have to rely on somebody else to help you do that. And in our strategy, it was a very clear strategy. I have a very important concept coming from my academic life. You want to change at international level, you have to rely on the ones internally that would bring that change in at home. So you have to help them. You have to help these women in their country that want to make the change. And that's why international networks are for. You can have this relation between the domestic level and the international level that can make the change and combat conservatism. And that's why, Jacqueline, you have to develop this network of women for climate.
Thank you, Laurence. I'm glad I asked that question, and I'm sorry we didn't have enough time for the Q&A, but I can so see that happen, this group of women getting together, enabling probably a group of men to agree among each other and inspiring that trust. I think this point about trust is so important. Thank you for your wonderful contribution. Thank you for your work to date and in the future. Thank you. I would like now to welcome Alain Wong, Minister of Civil Service and Administrative Reform and Minister of Environment, Sustainable Development and Disaster and Beach Management from the Republic of Mauritius. Please join me in welcoming Alain Wong. Good morning.
Good morning, Sophie.
Good morning. I know you have a bit of a problem with your voice.
I'm going to give Vogue that in a second. I'm sorry, my voice is not like this usually, but like the president says, it makes it a little bit more charming to have a voice like that.
That's
being
right.
like a crooner. I don't know, but I will try. I'm not pretending. It's not my voice, but
No, it's great. We love croaky voice. So you heard Laurence talking about Mauritius. It would be interesting to hear from your perspective. You know, how would you characterize the main challenges that Mauritius is facing in the implementation of renewable energy?
Listen, first of all, you know that in Mauritius we have a big problem. You know, like we are using most of our energy we use from fossil fuel. And it is a great problem for us in Mauritius to have accessibility to renewable energy, as it is a very high cost. And being seeds, you know, where we have sun all the time. In our country, we have the sea, we have wind. And this is one of those big challenges that we have to do to reach, like by 2025, we are trying to get up at least 35% of our renewable energy to be produced here in Mauritius. Actually, we are using about 80% of fossil fuel for our main energy.
So you're saying it's an issue of investment to make that initial investment to change the infrastructure.
Exactly, because you know we have a small economy, we are a small island, and later maybe we're going to talk about this, about how we should get the help, I believe, to have accessibility. Because I read recently, like in France, they have put a huge energy production from underwater, which is fantastic, which costs hundreds of billions of dollars maybe, but it will produce as much energy as a nuclear turbine. That is fantastic, but I don't know how in Mauritius we're going to try to do it.
So there is some, would you say there's some scope for sort of greater regional cooperation? We heard about La Réunion, that seems to be, if I'm not mistaken, 100% renewable. What is the scope for greater maybe cooperation between the different islands to achieve some of those objectives?
Cooperation in the region is very important, you know, because we have to know what a certain cohesion between islands in the Indian Ocean. And we do have some help from Réunion from time to time, you know, and we are very happy about that. And one of those cooperation we have recently is about our road transport, you know. We have people coming from Réunion helping us.
So looking forward into the COP22 in Marrakesh, do you go into this meeting with a specific set of expectations?
Yes, you know, I think we have heard enough of preaching because we heard that there are, during COP21, you know, we heard about the mobilization of $100 billion that would be accessible, you know, and now we say that it is time for us to know how to get access to this. As we know, since some of the most vulnerable, Mauritius is ranked 13th as one of the countries most vulnerable, and it's 13th to disaster risk and 7th as more vulnerable in the world, according to the rank that has been evoked in 2015. And I believe that we need to get access to this fund as fast as possible. It's time to know how we're going to do that.
Maybe, Laurence, this is a point you can respond to when we come at the end of this conversation, because it would be interesting to hear your perspective. So you talk about the vulnerability of Mauritius, you know, whether agriculture, hospitality, tourism. You are, you know, climate change poses real risk to all those sectors and the rest of the economy. So adaptation, I suppose, is a big part of what you're looking at as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you are looking to do to mitigate those risks, and what sort of innovation might you be considering moving forward around adaptation?
We have already sorted out a few goals that we want to achieve, and we know that we need at least we have like 17 kilometers of beach erosion, and we need to do something about that. As we, that Mauritius, we are living on tourism, we need these beaches, and we try to protect them, and we need to assess it as immediately as possible. And the other things are, we need to get, to be able, we have like 90% of our fresh water that goes in the sea. And if we can do something about that to build dams, we are proposing to build 3 dams. And we have big, deep gorges that can retain this fresh water. And we are lucky because in Mauritius, we don't have acid rain, and we have very good water. All we have to do is to make that dams and get that water to be retained. And if we can retain that water, I'm sure we can even give fresh water to Madagascar. If we can do it. And there are also other targets, that we are looking forward, like I said earlier, we need to reach that 35% renewable energy by 2025. And we are trying to phase out also the hydrocarbon HFCs, phasing out completely by 2025 also.
So who are the main stakeholders that you're working with in Mauritius? I'm thinking what is the part that maybe the private sector, local communities are playing in being part of the solution? Are you engaging with them, and in what way?
Absolutely. We have here we have some very good partners, all the private. We are lucky, Mauritius, we're small, we have very good communication between each other. And most of them have come to me to say that they are ready to help. Local communities help a lot. And the other part also, like I wanted to mention, is about this civil responsibility of each other, because we are not a government that we believe that we just have to help people all the time. Each person has to take his own responsibility to be clean, to have this responsibility to use green energy, and we are counting a lot on this kind of help also.
I had a question specifically on around gender and how are women's communities being engaged in climate change, and in terms of education program, how do you engage specifically women in that space?
I've always believed that the population of the world has about 50% of women, and for many, many years I believe that women has been struggling a lot to be trying to be doing as much as men. This is the equality. And for me, I believe that all education will start from the woman. The woman is the backbone of the family. A woman that can start education with the kids, that make a kid more responsible, will have a better future for that. We know, I heard recently, in Nairobi, 30% of wastage in our plate is contributing to, 30% of the carbon emission in the atmosphere comes from the wastage from our plate. And this also we have to assess. I believe the woman, she's the one who makes all the buyings in the supermarkets, and she's the one who holds the budget in the family. She's the one that can help the whole world, with the environment, with this kind of education.
So are you taking any specific initiative around the empowerment of women, the education of women in that space?
First I was Minister of Civil Service, and then they gave me the second mandate of Minister of Environment. In the civil service in my office, with about 300 staff, I have 250 that are women.
That's a start.
So I used to tease them. I said, we have to need equality now. They will laugh, but I'm very pleased. They are very good workers, and I don't think it's a really big issue in public service and also with the government, but I know in some sectors, but women have to have access to high posts. That's what I wish.
Great, thank you. Maybe Laurence, can I ask you to comment on Alain Wong's initial remark about the need for investment to support the development of renewable energy in Mauritius?
I think you were, Sophie, speaking about we are in the implementation phase. That's now. And for that, we need the financial instrument that can deliver this implementation. And that's a key element. And we need it very early because a country like Mauritius has to know what kind of access to capital market, what kind of support they can get, and at what price to do the investment. And so we can't wait 2020 to do that. So that's why in Marrakesh, and we would like to launch that quite officially, a number of government and financial institutions would gather with other government. I would be very happy that Mauritius is part of this. We'll launch an initiative to begin to test what are the instruments available and to, in a way, see how this national contribution would be transformed into investment policy plans, of course, investment plans, and of course then project. And what is the response of the public institution on finance and the private sector? And so we have to put all together. We need the guarantee from institutions like World Bank or the French Agency of Development to crowd in, to make private investment come in particular for renewable, and to lower the risk that this private investment would not like to bear alone. And that the system we would like to put in place, starting in Marrakesh, as at the beginning, a reduced number of countries that want to try and to do it before 2020. Because if not, as you know, all the national contribution, the plan is to develop things from 2020 to 2030. And the idea is to try to accelerate that movement, putting in place the financial environment ecosystem that is needed. So that's very important that countries can bring what they need, what is their investment plans, and see how the community of donors and the private sector can respond to that.
Thank you, Laurence. So are you bringing an investment plan to Marrakesh?
I don't think, yes, we will have an investment plan of what we're doing. In a whole, what I can understand is what I always say, being a politician myself, because I'm not in a view that we should give things to people for free if they don't have a will themselves to support, to use that kind of money. And if we offer a house, the person must know how to use the house. He's not always going to be on the government to say, look, the paint is gone now, I need to paint it again. But the person, as far as the person gets the money, is the same with Mauritius. I'm sure that here with the private sector and with the will already that we are doing here in Mauritius, the people, I see there is that great will that Mauritians will help with the fund together. We're using that fund and using it in a good abondance, like we say. And we will bring an investment plan to give you the guarantee that we are going to use the fund that we need, especially for that renewable energy that is really difficult for us to access.
Great, thank you very much for that. It was great to hear firsthand the reality of the challenges you face here in Mauritius. We're all here enjoying your hospitality, so we're very much invested in your future and meeting your targets. But thank you so much for your time and contribution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have a quick stage change, but I wanted to just see if I could get Sophie down here and ask her a question. Where did she go? Yeah, so we've just
Thank you.
So we've just had two interesting interviews on energy, and we've got two panels to come up. So you work in thought leadership. What should we be listening for as our next set of speakers come?
So we actually have one panel because we had a little bit of reshuffle.
Okay.
So what we'll be hearing is from experts and business leaders in big and small companies. And I think they'll bring their perspective on solution they're trying to bring to some of those problems. Solutions that are in need of scale. And that's really what we're going to be hearing about. What are the best practices? What are interesting case studies? How can these be translated in maybe other regions and other territories? And importantly, how can they be scaled?
And you're going to ask them about scale opportunities? Are we?
I
looking at
will,
the
and
audience?
if I don't, I'll make sure the audience do, because I promise we'll have an extensive Q&A this time around.
Excellent. Okay. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thank you.